of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's our regional agreement says you have to be from each town, isn't it?
I know that.
So maybe someone will go, are they?
Is there anyone in the audience who, I don't think this is,
You're on, it's just not very loud.
okay,
It's on.
all right. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the school committee on an item that is not on tonight's agenda?
I would like to ask the chair's permission. I have a letter that was voted on by the Board of Selectmen at Monday night's meeting, and they asked me to deliver it tonight, and I have copies for each member of the school committee. And if you, I will not read it because it is on the, it does discuss the budget, which is on the agenda, but I would like to pass out copies to each member of the
Okay.
school committee.
For committee members, this is something that we are not going to deal with it at all tonight, but something for you to read in preparation perhaps for the district communications meeting tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Hello, Shirley Faulkner, Middle School. With the chair's permission, I would just like to talk a little bit about some suggestions, perhaps. I know specifically we can't talk about the budget, but we were talking today in the middle school, and after looking at the numbers and the PDF that Mr. Farmer sent around, I really don't envy you. I know this is not an easy process. I know how vested you are in middle school foreign language. We were talking about the And looking at the staff at the school, it makes sense to see with the changes and the retirement, but I just wanted you to know, and I wanted it to be duly noted as food for thought, that when we move forward, instead of thinking about middle school foreign language as an elective in both 7th and 8th grade, what we would like to see with the continuity and keeping the rigor and keeping the focus on getting those kids ready for serious high school world foreign language is we'd like to have a full year commitment in 8th grade. We would like to devote the resources to using that time to actually get the students fully ready. Since I've been here, this is my 9th year, and Ann and I have worked really hard together, same continuity all through 8th grade. We've gotten our kids national award medals. We've gotten our kids to places in the 8th grade. Sorry, okay. You know I'm passionate about it. We understand that the cuts have to be made, and it does lend itself given to the time of the people retiring, but given that same amount of pool of money, what we would like to do is instill a full 8th grade program in middle school. That is just what we would like you to take into consideration. We've spoken to the principal and the teachers in the department, so we'd like you to think about that seriously as you move forward.
Right,
Thank you for your time.
Is there anything that is not on tonight's agenda that anyone would like to speak about? Okay, moving right along to the consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda which a member would like to remove?
Yes, Deb. I think it would be under expenditure report, C. And also, actually, under policy, there's just a correction for a date, so I don't think we have to pull
So
it.
we're removing C but making a correction on
Right.
a policy?
Right, just on a date.
All right, so do you want to tell me what the correction is?
For the, in policy, the subcommittee minutes say January 26, 2015. I think it should be 2016 on the minutes themselves, under policy.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. All right, well, that correction. Anything else?
I'd like to pull the item E, FY15 audit report and management letter, just to give the committee a chance to hear about it, not just accept it.
Okay, with the correction on the date on the minutes, but removing items C and E, could we have a motion to approve the rest of the items?
Could I just look to check on that date,
Okay.
the December 16, and I don't see the papers in my packet.
It should be January.
We did have a meeting on policy did meet on December 16 to look at the restraint policy immediately prior to the meeting of the school committee.
Find them for you.
Am I on the wrong ship?
Saying that
Page 29 of the
29?
is Tuesday, January 23rd? Is that,
26.
should be 16, thank you.
The year is wrong.
Yes.
He is
Yeah.
wrong.
I'll defer to Mr. Sullivan.
Wise man. With that correction noted, and removing items C and E under the Finance Subcommittee, could we have a motion to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right. I would like to deal with those two items right now. Dina, would you like to?
On page 23, which is the year-to-date expenditures, it looks like the property and liability insurance is overspent. Can you explain why? I haven't seen any explanation.
Would you like me
Well,
to,
I can
Rob?
say it's the rebates, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they weren't noted in the minutes, but we kind of pay up front, and then the state gives us money back at the end of the year.
So it's through
reduces
Maya.
our
We have
payments.
our policies through Maya, and so we generally get, we get an early payment credit by paying all of our payments within 30 days of the start of the fiscal year, and then we also continue to get credits for I attended in a training on
Workshops.
risk assessment, and we get a couple points. That gives us a couple thousand back. They were actually included in that is actually there was some changes with our workman's comp audit that adjusted it up, waiting to see if that keeps it high, and that was something we haven't even talked about in the Finance Subcommittee, because that was a more recent development. But that could end slightly over, but generally that line we spend over, and it pulls
Balances
back to
out.
within budget.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Robin, the audit report?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about it publicly, not just pass it through the consent, so that the public is aware that we had a very clean audit, as we have for many recent years, and I just wanted to go through some of the bullet points to let the public know how we rank. And then there were some findings that are not significant material findings, but they're just advice from our auditor on areas where we could continue to even do a better job. So just in summary, I'd like to let everyone know that there were no significant deficiencies in internal control related to the audit of the financial statements. No instances of noncompliance which were material to the financial statements were reported. No material weaknesses in internal controls relating to major programs were reported. No findings related to major federal awards programs, and then they break down the ones that we are participating in. And no findings were reported related to the financial statements, and no findings or questioned costs were reported related to federal awards. In the management letter, that is not the big bound one, but the small one that highlights some of the areas where we could be making some adjustments. There was an issue about how timely we were making our bank statements and things, and so that's being addressed. There were some issues of expenditures being recorded in the wrong fiscal year, some bills that came in late that were processed for 2016 should have been processed in 2015. There were concerns about cybersecurity, and they weren't saying that we're not doing everything we can, but they're really paying attention to this going forward, and they gave us some areas that we could be paying attention to just to be sure that we're being as careful as we can. Another review of the OPEB. There was a recommendation when we voted to put $10,000 aside for our OPEB trust. They wanted it in a completely separate account, not just earmarked for it. So that's a change that we're going to be making going forward. And then an update on some of the GASB standards that are going to be different going forward, just to give us a heads up of things we'll be facing in the upcoming years. Have I left anything significant out of?
I don't believe so, no. I
Okay.
think it's
The
all-
only footnote I would add, in terms of the OPEB trust, you did discuss that a while ago, and the last time you discussed it, you came to the conclusion that at the moment you have chump change in there, and that you would look at that again when there was a more substantial sum in the budget. So you, as a committee, you have discussed that.
Yes,
That
we
possibility
have. It's
before.
just from their recommendation, it was making sure it was set aside in a completely separate account, even though we couldn't have spent it on anything else anyway. They just want to see that delineated, I think. So, any questions that Brian or I can answer?
When I looked at this and looked at what our concerns were last year, it seems like the cash reconciliation was an issue again this year as it was last year. Can you tell me, Brian, exactly what we're doing to mitigate that?
We have a change in
Tied to new
personnel.
treasurer?
That's directly related to the treasurer.
Okay.
And so I think we have a treasurer that's transitioning in beginning now, and that by March 1st, that transition should be complete. And I think it's about a fresh set of eyes, as well as, it's not to discredit the prior treasurer, but we have a new and fresh set of eyes. As you have recommended the appointment or approved the appointment last week, just coming in, experience in a region, CPA. So I believe those issues will not be in place moving forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the audit report? All right, thank you very much. Next, remarks in business. To confirm the delegates to the National School Board Association Conference to be held in Boston on April 9th to 11th. And there were two members of the committee who asked to be delegates, and Monique and Paul will be going to that conference, April 9th to 11th. And I trust they will come back with all sorts of wonderful things for us.
I'm only going one day.
You're only going one day. Monique is only going one day. Okay.
It'll be well worth it.
I don't know if that means, I'm asking a question that I don't know that anyone here can answer. Does that, if Monique's going one day, would we consider sending somebody else for another day? Or is that not possible? We would have to pay a full, I
have just turned around and looked at Patty. She has nodded at me. So outside the meeting, we'll brief you if it's possible to put somebody else in.
Okay, that's what okay, thank you very much. Student representatives report, Shannon.
Show you.
Hi, everyone. Since there was no regular school committee meeting in January, it feels like it has been a while since my last student report. There are quite a few things on the agenda for this month, but I will try to keep it short and simple. Before I begin, I would like to recognize the boys varsity hockey team, who on Saturday beat one of their rivals, Masco, 6-0, which was a huge victory considering they have not yet beat Masco this season. The previous Saturday, the wrestling team earned a first-place title at the Cape Ann League meet. I will not list all of the scores for other sports, but I can say that the Vikings have been working very hard this winter, and many teams are hopeful of making the tournament. Reflecting on the past several weeks, I would like to also acknowledge the Leadership Speaking Series, which began in October of this school year when Harvey Alston came to speak. The program has been consistently successful and fortunately has expanded to include not only student athletes, but all members of the Triton community. In January, internationally recognized motivational speaker Mr. Al Duncan came to share his message with Triton. As with the first two speakers, students appeared to be truly inspired by the event, and we look forward to welcoming the final speaker in mid-March. Also important to recognize is the Addiction Awareness event, which was conducted by over 60 students on the evening of January 30th. Triton anatomy teacher Miss Reel played a huge role in organizing the event, which featured heroin awareness acts, skits, and live music, as well as a bake sale and donations. All proceeds were sent to the Pettingale House in Salisbury. As the older sister to a fourth grader at Pine Grove, I feel that I must also comment on the performance put on by the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders from Pine Grove Elementary School, which was called Once on This Island. Although she played the role of a peasant and she did not have any lines, I know that my sister was thrilled to be able to stand on the stage of the high school auditorium, as I imagine all of the students were. The Triton Drama Department sets a wonderful example for the younger kids looking to fill their shoes, which I think is a great way of getting students involved in the Viking community early. Likewise, at Salisbury Elementary School, math specialist Mrs. Kathy Comans has taken the initiative in organizing a Rubik's Cube competition with students from the Triton Elementary, Middle, and High Schools. The event will take place on March 10th, with 10 teams competing to solve 25 Rubik's Cubes as fast as possible. Not only is this a fun way of bringing students together, but according to Mrs. Comans, it also serves a role in teaching students crucial math concepts from both algebra and geometry. I would also like to mention that we will be continuing with the MVP Bystander Training Program through the Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center. There are 2 more trainings this year for our current students, and then plans will begin to expand the program in the fall to other high school students in the middle school as well. Students will be making a presentation to the faculty in the spring explaining their roles. Next week, from Monday the 15th to Friday the 19th, all schools in the district will be closed for February break. Before I end, I should note that much of the information in my report can be found on the student-produced VTV channel. These episodes are shown weekly, and although they are not quite worthy of a News and Documentary Emmy Award, they can be very informative and entertaining, so I invite you all to watch it if you have a chance. Despite all the unforeseen snow, I hope everyone has a great pre-spring break and a happy Valentine's Day. Please let me know if you have any questions regarding the agenda. Thank you.
Any questions for Shannon? Linda?
Do we know how much money the heroin?
I'm not sure how much they raised. I know that Sam DeBacco, who actually, she writes for the school paper as well, did an article on it, though, that ran last week in the paper. So I think that would be listed there.
I thank you for mentioning those events that are involving the elementary schools. That was good.
Could I just add that we are looking to release part of the video of the heroin addiction event. I'm not quite sure what to call it, to see whether or not some of the TV channels would show some of that. Some of the student performances were really quite remarkable. Really quite remarkable.
I didn't have a chance to attend it myself, but from seeing some of the clips of it, it looked really, really cool. So, well, thank you.
Well, thank you. Next item on our agenda, does anyone have any new business to consider, any agenda items proposed for future meetings, and any items of urgent nature to be considered tonight? None? Thank you very much. Moving along to reports and deliberations, FY17 operating budget.
I'd like to suggest that instead of taking this in 3 parts, we take it in 2, since A is very much rolled into C. And that you begin by receiving an update on the Public Employees Committee's review of health insurance benefits, and then go into the tentative budget.
Certainly.
So I don't know whether Mrs. Sullivan would like to take up that cudgel.
Well, we continue to meet with the PEC, and we did look at a couple of different health plans. We've ruled out 2. I think we can safely say, I'm not naming names, but one because they were way too high, and the other one really wouldn't cover the needs of our employees here. So we have a meeting tomorrow again to continue the negotiations and the hard work that's being done not only by the administration but by the members of the PEC.
And at this stage, it's at 0.
Yes.
The increase at the moment is 0.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, just having been there for not all of it, but part of it's very positive. It's,
Right.
I think, very good job with all people involved.
Okay. I'd like to make an introduction, talk to the opening narrative of this report, and then ask Brian to go through the changes which are embedded in it. This is my 20th school district budget. It's the most difficult that I have experienced. Latterly, we have, I think, been part of a district that's been moving forward in significant ways. And at the moment, we are coming up against a brick wall which is going to turn us back. We're in a situation where teachers are beginning to talk about their subject in comparison with other subjects in terms of their importance. And I've been there before. And when that begins to happen, the kind of community sense within a school community can be severely disrupted. And they do that because, first of all, they believe that their subject content is important. And secondly, clearly people are obviously concerned about their jobs. But my experience is that people argue from the importance of the content primarily. But that is where we're getting to. Teachers on the verge of, I've seen some evidence of it, of arguing that their subject is more important than something else. And you and I and Brian and the Chief Academic Officer and the Special Education Administrator are in the business of, I believe, trying to preserve a curriculum experience which is characterized by depth, by breadth, by relevance. And as soon as you start saying, well, we don't need the visual and performing arts, or we don't need world languages, or we don't need this, or we don't need that, we're at the point of really beginning to diminish the opportunities for student success, because some of those subjects that some people may think are less important are those areas where some students do experience real success. And if we aren't able to create a curriculum in which the great majority of children have the opportunity to be successful, then we know what happens. They turn off away from school. I hear the argument that our curriculum must prepare people for the real world, and I understand that there are jobs developing in particular areas of employment. But elementary school is not where we start preparing people for that. That we need to continue to ensure that children in elementary school have a complete breadth of opportunity. And we need to continue that through middle school, and we need to continue that through high school. As soon as we start taking programs out, we diminish the opportunities for children to be successful, not least because some of the things that people think don't have utility are actually part of adults' experience of life. We talk about preparing people for the real world. Well, the real world does include art and music and dance. So I hope very much that as you review this budget, you will bear in mind the importance of maintaining that program breadth. But by way of introduction, I want to state very clearly, in terms of our relationships with the towns, my working assumption is that the towns do not want to receive a bill that is more than 2.5% plus a share of growth. That's what I think would be a fair spread of resources. That is where we start. And over the past several years, each year, we have come with this budget as a high watermark, understanding that things will change between now and March 9th, hopefully for the better, as we get indication from the legislature that they're not going to agree with some of the governor's proposals, and as we continue to look for savings and continue discussions with the Public Employee Committee. So whatever the final figure is in here, I well understand that in their situation, with their limited capacity to raise funds, that they are looking for us to try to develop a budget that all the towns can afford. I believe we have done that historically. Last year, because the governor had an extended period of time to prepare his budget, we produced a budget. And then when one of the towns clearly couldn't afford the implications of that, we cut nearly $500,000 out of the budget between the tentative budget and the final budget. And I can assure this committee and anybody who's listening that we will continue to do that. Having said that, I have a responsibility, and I believe you have a responsibility, as the chairperson articulated at the last meeting, to advocate for the needs of our children. It would be possible to simply bring in a budget that everybody can afford, and without, yep, we're all happy until we see the effects. So I see this budget as a start of a discussion, and circumstances will change, and as we move forward, it will evolve. That is what history tells us. The final thing I want to say is to thank Brian on my left and his finance staff for bringing this home. It's a huge task. The amount of detail that you have is a demonstration of public transparency that I don't think that you find in all districts. If anybody really wants to know how we're spending our money, this document, if you choose to go through it, tells you that story. And I am personally very proud of the way that the district has developed this over the past several years, because I don't know what more we could do to provide information to you and the public about the way that scarce resources are being spent. I'd like to take you through the start of the budget, the narrative. You haven't seen it before, and there are people maybe listening who don't have access to it. So I'm going to take you through this a little bit slowly, so that it's clear that this tentative budget is prepared in accordance with the timeline established by the regional agreement, established with our partner towns, that we will hold a public hearing on February 24th when Mrs. Faulkner will have opportunity to talk again, and that you're scheduled to prepare a final budget by March 9th, that we will then get to town administrators, chairs of finance committees, and chairs of boards of selectmen by the middle of March. You know, because you experienced it, that schools have had a full opportunity to present their needs to the school committee, which in aggregate would increase our spending by $3.3 million to get to what we might regard as being an adequate budget. The context begins with state funding issues. You've already heard about the governor's proposals, level funding, the transport reimbursement below the fully funding commitment, and I have put round the table a copy of a letter from Senator O'Connor Ives to Governor Baker regarding that particular issue. I believe that Senator Tarr intends to follow suit. You know about the increased tuition impact of the governor taking away the tapering effect of the reimbursement, and you'll know that he's recommending $20 per student as against the $25. It's not a huge sum of money, but it doesn't sound as if the governor's funding public schools in good faith when he puts a $20 per student funding proposal out there. B is important for our conversation with the community. It shows that state funding has actually gone down over the past 10 years, and that the proportion of funding assessed to the towns has therefore gone up. At the moment, the state is moving to a position where it will fund 82.5% of foundation budget. Have I got that right, Brian? More or less? That is all the state is willing to shell out for public schools within the state. And people look at their tax bills, and this graph shows why tax bills are going up in terms of the cost of public schooling. If you turn to page 2 at the top, you'll recall, as we did at the last meeting, that we cut 1.5 million in total out of the budget. Initially 1.1, and then an additional 4 and a bit. That involved reducing district office professional leadership positions by 26%, took out 12.5 teachers and a high school administrators. So as we start looking for reductions this year, we are doing it on top of that. You know that personnel costs represent about 80% of, in total, in aggregate, about 80% of district spending. And so when we start looking for cuts on top of cuts, Brian, what's the current difference between the supplies budget of Newbury now and when you were principal?
It's half of what it was when I became principal in 2003.
So that's an illustration. He wasn't expecting that, but I knew he would know the answer.
Thank you, PTAs.
Well, yes, and teachers. We struggle with the regional assessment arrangements, whereas you know that the state determines the minimum spending requirement, and then the difference between that and the actual budget spend is distributed on the basis of student enrollment, and that created a huge problem last year. And it's creating a huge problem this year. And I'm sure that Brian will not be able to contain himself at some point in the evening by anticipating a discussion at tomorrow's District Communications Committee by looking at a way in which we can mitigate that difficulty. We've been talking about it for 5 years. We haven't acted. If there's any year where we have good reason to act, we had it last year, and we had it this year. I mean, basically, as you know, we can bring in a budget with an average assessment to the towns, but the assessments to individual towns can vary enormously depending on enrollment changes as between the towns. And at the moment, there's no cushion for that. D, we need to put funds back in excess and deficiency, the rainy day account. We drew it down again last year. We need to have a reasonable fund in there in case something goes seriously wrong, because if something goes seriously wrong and we don't have those resources, we have to go to the towns to ask for a supplemental appropriation. It's no surprise that special education costs and health insurance costs continue to be major and very problematic expenditure drivers. I've mentioned previously that from where we are now to an adequate budget would cost £3.3 million. People talk about, well, you're spending above, did I say pounds again? That's twice. That's twice.
Stay away from euros.
Twice. They're more valuable than dollars. You understand that, don't you?
And clearly better.
The big disadvantage is that you get coins for £1, and they're very awkward in your back pocket. Just so that you know. So $33 million to bridge that gap. And again, I think this is significant in terms of the budget. You have there at the bottom the graph of the school choice history, which has been extremely positive. As we start tinkering with what we're able to offer in schools, we're operating in an education market that's been created very deliberately, not by me and maybe not my followers, such as I have. But if we start reducing the apparent quality of what we offer in our schools, that graph could change. And as that graph changes, you will know that dollars will flow out of the district. And that makes more problematic our capacity to provide what we want to provide for our students. Over the page, the contextual demographic changes. We know that across the state, student numbers are dropping gradually, more quickly in some places than others. But you have here the picture of a district change of minus 1.6% as against minus 0.2% for the state. Now the question is asked, if your student numbers are dropping, why can't you reduce your budget? Well, taking one or two teachers out of a range of different, not teachers, students out of a range of different classes doesn't allow you to reduce the number of teachers. It doesn't allow you to reduce the number of classrooms. It doesn't allow you to reduce your utility costs and all that. So what happens is that we lose the benefits of efficiency of scale. We are responding to reductions in student numbers. You'll know that Newbury, in its budget proposals, reduced the number of teachers by 1 to reflect the reduction in the number of students at a grade level in the school. But any notion whatsoever that because student numbers are dropping, there's a linear relationship between the resources that you need for the rest is completely misconceived. Completely misconceived. Let me explain why. I became a program coordinator for personnel in the Sheffield district in 1976. At that time, its funding methodology for personnel was you establish a pupil-teacher ratio, you take the number of students in the school, and then use the student-teacher ratio to determine the number of teachers the school will have. And the principal then had to work out how to use those teachers. We established the personnel requirements of a school, first of all, with the number of classes that we need to teach. And then we look for the add-ons in terms of IAs, special education teachers, and so on. So as soon as we start thinking about resourcing schools simply on the basis of the number of students in the school or the district, you completely destroy the methodology of resourcing a school. And if you simply work on a pupil-teacher ratio, you finish up with mixed-age classes or classes of hugely different size depending on the particular number of students in a particular grade level. And you saw figures at a recent meeting where we illustrated what happens if you take a teacher out of every grade level of every elementary school. And if we want class sizes in the 30 range, then that's the thing to do. But I am never, ever going to recommend that to you. Bottom of page 3 takes you through some of the good things that have been happening. We've got a new mathematics program. It's a challenge, but teachers seem to be responding very positively to that. Our efforts to make data-driven decisions about student instruction are gradually moving up through the middle school and into the high school. We took the PARCC tests this year, arguably more rigorous than MCAS, and our ELA results in particular were very, very strong, and our math results encouraging. Purely with the aid of volunteers, the high school has introduced an advisory program 9 through 12. I originally thought they might get to 10 and stop there, but they have gone 9 through 12. And that means that every 8 days or so, an adult meets with about 12 students to keep getting to know them, what they're interested in, what they're concerned about, to ask good questions about what they are doing or should be doing, entirely on a voluntary basis. We've started to develop I believe, a thoughtful response to the growth in the number of students who present themselves with depression, anxiety, or trauma. Brian and I attended a Superintendent's Association couple of presentations fairly recently, and it's very interesting how when people talk to us about how we react when we are stressed. The example was, you don't know where your phone is, your cell phone. Are you in a good place to make good decisions about anything until you find your phone or your car keys? If you're anxious, your operational IQ drops by 12 to 20 points. Your executive functioning goes down south. We're learning a lot about how we react when we are stressed, anxious, and depressed. So we are looking to respond to that. At the moment, the leadership is learning about that, and steps are being taken to introduce some district-wide professional development next year to help us respond in a more positive way to students who present these almost illnesses. We have laptops for all our educators. The towns, and thank you, Joe, a leader of the towns in terms of supporting the stadium project. We've got approval to the Pine Grove project, and there is a letter, I think, in your packet, a copy of a letter from the MSBA confirming that. And in terms of athletics, you made the decision to appoint a full-time athletic director. That and helped with some reorganization of the postseason. Our teams are increasingly participating well in that, and you heard that in part in Shannon Lyon's report. So there are lots of good things going on. And the question is, how are we able to sustain those good things in the face, potentially, of diminishing resources? How have you approached the development of the budget? I believe that you've been faithful to the mission of the district and the district development plan. You're looking to minimize increases in health insurance, which you've heard about in part today, and special education out of district costs. You've heard from David McGee about proposals to try to develop an in-district program to support students with serious behavioral issues rather than sending them out of district, with the dual benefit of, first of all, saving money, but more importantly, I put above that, educating children with their peers rather than sending them away. You've looked to minimize limitations on program offerings, maintain class sizes, K-12, though clearly some of that is going in the wrong direction. You've looked to maintain the team structure in the middle school. We could cut buses, but without the buses, students can't get home after the after-school programs, and they are flourishing, particularly in the middle school at the moment. You've looked to fulfill your mandatory, often underfunded obligations to the state. And you've also advocated at the state level for additional funding. So I believe that those are the things that have been in the forefront of your minds as you have looked to develop that. If I've got that wrong, I'm sure you'll take the opportunity to add or subtract when we get to the discussion. So the principal features, not all the features, are summarized at the bottom of page 4. Holding health insurance costs to a 0 or a negative if possible. Planning that in-district program for students with behavioral issues. Looks to reduce by 4 the number of elementary school teachers, with some classes rising to 26. I think it might be useful at some stage to have a community discussion about the maximum class size that people feel is appropriate. I don't know if they're still there, but certainly it's not long ago that Rowley had a number of papers on the town website that was essentially still there. I know who's responsible for them. Advocating for small classes. We've talked about eliminating 2 of the 3 math specialist positions. You gave us some advice at your last meeting. When you come to the actual budget, you'll see that we're suggesting that you approach that in a slightly different way. You well know, because Mrs. Faulkner has reminded you of the world languages situation. I should, as an aside, I learned about that advice which had been given to the principal this afternoon. We haven't had a chance yet to see what that would do to the schedule that we discussed, or some of us discussed this morning. And to simplify the budget, at the bottom there you'll see that, and Brian will draw your attention to what looks like a huge increase in district budget spending as against schools, because we are bringing the fuel, electricity, water services, the utilities together as a single line. So that's an introduction to what follows.
Christopher, can I just, I think you just skipped over one, combining the elementary IT and library media.
I did, thank you for that. Yes, thank you. As we looked at where we might make savings, we have an IT program in the schools. It's part of the specialist provision, and we have library media specialists running the libraries. Having looked at the math, we looked at those areas, and as you'll know from an earlier discussion, the proposal is that we merge those activities with one teacher supporting learning in the library and supporting learning in technology. Is that where we want to be, given that we have a science, technology, engineering and math development program? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not least because our technology teachers have been revising their curriculum to have it focus much less on just dealing with the hardware, but programming the hardware and taking it to a very different level. So that is a very difficult piece to deal with. Moving on to page 5, the adequate budget is a list of what was asked for, and I don't think we need to go that in detail. I think when we get to page 10, I think this is where I need to, I can do it, but Brian has been dealing with it, and I think he therefore, and it will be his budget down the line. So Brian, would you take us through the detail?
I believe that you gave the majority of the detail as far as the concepts, but let me take you through the numbers. Again, because this is being televised and there's an audience, I want to reiterate some of these, but to go through the changes, pages 10 and 11 take you through what I changed the title and called it required services. We've called this a level services budget in the past. The reality is there are some things we need to add, some things that are subtracted as costs change, as a requirement for student services change. So the next 2 pages go through what we need as far as a budget to keep what we have this year and move it forward into next year. So taking through The top section is $967,544. That's the entirety of the change in personnel costs. That does include 2% for all non-union personnel, all administration and support staff. It includes all contract movement, steps and scale, and lane changes. It includes the transition from a superintendent, assistant superintendent to superintendent school business administrator, which provided some savings. There is a salary contingency of roughly 0.5% included in that figure. 60,000 of column movement for the TRTA folks who notified us by December 15th that they intend to move columns next year due to degrees or credits. And then the key, it's important to point out that last bullet that includes $195,000. And I was actually talking with and looking at budget documents from a neighboring district to ours, regional school. And they're seeing the same thing in that as enrollment declines, choice is also going to decline through natural attrition. As we looked at that graph earlier in the document, where we were at one point had 270, again prior to that, but we had 273 students out and about 76 in, where we were close to 200 out of whack. We now have roughly double in what we have, a number of students going out, so roughly 80 going out and 163 students coming in. That's extremely positive news. However, last year we had 180, I forget the number, 180, roughly 183. So by losing those students, we therefore start to lose revenue. So as we start to lose revenue, and it was the same thing that that Pentucket's dealing with, if you rely on that as a source of funding, we then grow dependent on that, and then it's an issue when the funding source goes away. So for us, that figure, the 967, slightly deceiving, includes close to $200,000 in funding for salaries that we've funded out of school choice, that because of no more or reduced revenues and we were carrying balances forward, we don't have those resources any longer, so those have to roll back into the general fund. So then, if we wanted to take that piece out, the real net effect is about $767,000 as far as the actual cost, the increase in actual personnel costs. Continuing down the page, as Christopher mentioned, there was in the proposal from Principal Yando a reduction of one classroom teacher, and that has nothing to do with budget cuts per se, as much as through natural attrition and student enrollments going down, you see maintaining class sizes in the upper teens, but reducing one section as a larger class graduates out of 6th grade. We did talk about adding in an additional 5-day pre-K session. That's a 5 half-day. That requires obviously a teacher and an IA half-time. The increase of $23,000 and change assumes an offset of tuitions. Obviously, that assumes that there are 8 students paying full tuition. It could be less than that. It could be greater than that. But it's a target figure. At Pine Grove School, there is an addition of $2,750, and that's to outfit one additional classroom with sound field amplification systems required by an IEP. At Salisbury, also adding a preschool, but it's a 2-day section. Again, net of revenue from tuitions. And also at Salisbury, there were some special education instructional assistants, a 0.1 and a 0.5 FTE that needed to be added as a result of IEP requirements. As Christopher has mentioned, we've been talking about trying to align the middle school and the high school schedule, mostly to provide other opportunities for students. In order for Principal McCrae to get that to work, and working with Principal Daw, we needed to have those specialists full-time, so both the art and the PE are increased to 1.0 from 0.8. So that increase of $25,823 maintains the specialists, and again, art, music, PE, at a full-time equivalency, which allows that the schedule to be aligned with the high school.
Brian, can I interrupt
Absolutely.
you? Is the tech teacher full-time?
The technology teacher is currently half-time.
And music is completely an option, like
Say that music isn't, what do you mean? Music is full-time.
Music is full-time,
Yep.
and the kids do rotate to that. That's one of the four.
Yes.
And tech is only half-time.
There's two kinds of tech. There's information
Computer tech.
technology tech,
Okay.
and there's the engineering tech. That is full-time.
Right.
Engineering
so tech
tech is
engineering
full-time.
is a full-time.
Okay.
And then the instructional technology computer lab per se is half-time. Supplies and materials, the middle school line, lines are down by $10,900 for postage and supplies and materials. Here's a change from the previous discussions. We had talked about adding 2 instructional assistants at the high school. That hasn't changed. However, there will be 2 reductions at Newbury that we've learned about as we've continued to refine and make sure we don't have excess capacity there. 2 IAs at Newbury Elementary that would transfer the funding, or the people, if they so desire, would transfer to the high school. So that was showing an increase. 2 full salaries, 2 full benefit packages, so that was $65,000. So that's now a 0 to meet that need. Accreditations at the high school, $1,100. $18,000 for sound field amplification at the high school. We've been talking about this for years, and now those students are moving into the high school, and so those students require those accommodations. We did include $5,000, as Catherine Daw had mentioned. The visual performing arts hasn't seen an increase in many years. The proposal was $20,000. So again, it's not where it needs to be, but it increased $5,000. So there was some increase. And then there is a reduction. I believe we talked about this last week. I apologize. Some of these things can't remember when they changed, but there's a student who will be likely going out place now. And we had both a tuition and the staffing, so we can reduce staffing, assuming that student does indeed go into that outplacement. So that's those are the changes for as far as personnel costs. Moving into the next bracket, unemployment. Again, any of the reductions that we've talked about, we assume the cost of unemployment with that position. So for this year, for the general line, I can say we can pull $82,000 out of that, because of where we're at right now. Again, we then start adding back to that, but that is a net at that point. Essex Regional Retirement, it's a required assessment formula. We don't have a say in that. That's $85,000. Employee medical insurance, as Christopher mentioned, at this point we are, again, without going into detail, we're at 0 for our HMO and our PPO plans. Medics for retirees doesn't renew until January 1, 2016, so we have to assume a percentage increase. In all likelihood, maybe that gets better as well, but at this point, you can see there's a slight change there. I believe the number was more towards 150,000 in savings, and it's now down to 125. But again, a 0% renewal and even a 10% on medics, because enrollments have changed from where we budgeted this year. It's actually a savings even to get to 0. The discussion now is, are we able to get to a renewal plan that's even better than a 0% renewal on the premiums?
And we do have the possibility of people receiving an incentive not to take part in our scheme that's on the table with the PEC. Only just started the discussion, but that may result in further savings.
Absolutely. And then the final in that section is that we talked about this last week, changing payroll providers. We're now in a situation where we need to make this change now, and so therefore need to budget that for next year. The bottom of the page, electricity and heating fuel, roughly $44,000 in increase across the district. Over the page, I believe we had spoken about contracted services. That's the cost for all technology contracts and license contracts and renewals, $32,009. Last week we had talked about replace the phone system at Pine Grove and at Newbury. At this point, we're saying we're replacing it at Pine Grove, not replacing it at Newbury. Again, as long as everyone's aware that the Newbury system is at end of life, it's the same scenario as far as Pine Grove, in that we cannot get parts from the manufacturer anymore. The reality is the Newbury system is several years newer, so we haven't seen that happen yet. But as long as everyone is aware, the Pine Grove is a must-do, as we were down for 9 days a couple of weeks ago, just waiting to get parts from overseas. We have left the additional cost for the PC lease so that every staff member in the district is on the same model year of PC. That's helpful from a support standpoint, is also as far as an equity standpoint, to ensure that we don't have some staff on brand new PCs and then a handful who are on old clunkers and don't have the same access. That lease cost also does refresh and make sure that all of our computer-assisted design, our CAD labs at the high school and at the middle school do have new PCs that can handle that software as well. And then the bottom two are prior purchases that we had previously paid out of. The Chromebooks were out of choice, and the middle school, high school, and SES phone systems we had paid for building use for the year. Those need to be rolled into the general fund as well. Moving to the next section, unless there's any questions on those. I don't believe, as far as special ed contracted services, up 100,000, summer programming up 25,000, home tutoring up 5,000, ELL contracted services up 25,000, Atlas mapping, again, that's rolling it from explorations funding into the general fund, 10,800. Special education transportation up 82,000. The only change on this section is you see regular transportation increase. We had talked last week about a fuel adjustment clause. This year, it's estimated to be about $14,000 that we'll get back because the price of gas has fallen since December of 14 when we locked that contract. We'll take a bet here and say we're going to get the same reimbursement next year. The way that works is at the end of the year, whatever the lowest point of the gas is, we get a reimbursement based on miles used. So I pulled 14,000 out of that. That might be aggressive, but again, when we're talking about $14,000, we can be aggressive. And athletics, coaches, and transportation are contractual requirements. The last three, again, choice tuitions. This year we're going to be at 866, so we're already saving 50,000 this year. To decrease down to 152 in savings, that assumes there's 18 students who are graduating for a total of about 103,000 more in savings. As Christopher mentioned, one of the things that will likely see a fluctuation in the budget is the charter assessment and refunding formula, going from a 5-year funding assistance down to a 2-year. And again, for a district like Triton that is not underperforming, we actually will receive 1 year of reimbursement. So if a student leaves Triton and goes to the River Valley Charter, the first year the state will fund the 100% of the cost. As of the second year and following, the district is responsible for the entirety of that cost. So that calculation adds close to 65,000 to our charter charges. And then the special education increase of 266,000, again, as David had mentioned, that is money that we are assuming, what we are hoping is that money is currently sitting in out-of-district tuitions due to the nature of the students and the challenges we're facing and they're facing. Our hope is that we can build an in-district program with that money. That would include social workers for that program, and hopefully a program that we could, social workers we could share with Newbury Elementary as well. But that money is still tied up there in that line.
Can I ask a question, Brian?
Absolutely.
With the charter school tuitions, can you speak more about that and what the reimbursement actually is compared to choice?
It's the full foundation.
The full foundation, yeah. I don't
We
think that's
pay the full
calculation.
foundation budget. So it varies from district to district, depending upon what their foundation cost is per student. So whatever it costs us to educate a student, the whole of that funding goes to the charter school, which is like the whole question of reducing numbers, because you don't close classes and you don't lose teachers when they go from here and there.
Right, and that's kind of my point, that it's actually a lot more than having a student choice in.
It's 11 to 12,000
choice
per
out.
student versus 5,000 for school choice.
Exactly. And I think that's an important point to make.
A very important point to make. I don't know that we'll solve that problem in the budget, but even if we could get back to where we were as far as the reimbursement calculations, that would at least bring 65,000 back as far as charges. So again, if we were to bring those changes forward into the budget, it would require $1,478,000 in new costs. That would be about a 3.9% increase in our operating costs. All things considered, I don't think that's a ridiculous number. Looking at other districts, most have been in that 2 to 4 to 5% as far as actual operating costs. However, we then go to the
Brian,
bottom.
before you go on, you will have read in the paper the budget preparations of a neighbouring district that I won't categorise. How much do they get per student more through Chapter 70? About $1,000 a student more?
Well, I'm not sure. Their population is roughly the same, and they are close to 13 million in Chapter 70, and we are at 8.7.
Long-standing issue.
We're at just under 8.5. So, yes.
I only mention that if people are comparing the discussions which are going on in two neighbouring districts whose funding arrangements from the state are dramatically different.
And I did the math today. What that 62,000 increase in Chapter 70 amounts to is 0.7% increase over last year's Chapter 70 for us.
And I was actually thinking along those same lines, and part of the issue is that there was some confusion around the Chapter 70 formula this year, and we'll talk about this in revenues. It funded, again, we are so far above our foundation budget that any of the changes in the formula are not going to give us new funding. And I can confirm, Dina, we talked about this last week, I still cannot say I have my hands completely wrapped around the economically disadvantaged versus free or reduced lunch, but it had zero impact on our budget for this year. And again, my understanding is it won't, because we're still so far above our foundation budget. So the issue is our costs going up 3-point-some-odd% isn't exorbitant, but then when you have a foundation calculation that has a negative 0.4% as far as inflation rate, all we're doing is getting further and further out of whack. So we were having this discussion today about the Chapter 70 formula with the Finance Subcommittee. Had the state just inflated the foundation accurately, 2.5%, even 2.5% a year would have been better. We wouldn't be in the same situation we're in. On top of that, we have costs. It's easy to say, okay, personnel costs go up 1.5–2% a year, but with healthcare and special education costs and overall operating costs generally exceeding inflation, we find ourselves in a situation where you can't use the foundation formula as an argument about how we're not spending wisely, because it's completely comparing. It's not even apples and oranges. It's like watermelons and steak. So that's part of the issue here, is that we have a budget that, without making any cuts, is a 3.9% increase. So then you go to the bottom of the page here, and you remember last year we used $250,000 of our excess and deficiency. We were at 787, so call it 20%, a little over 20% of our excess and deficiency. This year, we're certified at about 595,000. Of that money, about 191,000 of that is actually tied up. I know we don't want to talk about this one more time, but our arrangements with True North Solar and our credits, we have credits of 191,000 on our national grid bills. It's real cash. We just can't get a reimbursement. We've got to spend it down. Through the DOR, they're calling that free cash. So even though we can say round it to 600,000 and round it to 200,000 we have in credits, we really have 400,000 to us, or accessible to us, in the case of an emergency. and we don't have the vehicle to go back to the towns. The selectmen couldn't, if they wanted to, just give us money. It has to be a town meeting. So there really isn't a vehicle for us in the case of an emergency to get funding like you can in a city or town to get a supplemental appropriation. So that first line there, again, we're still saying we're going to use 100,000 of excess and deficiency. You know
So
how I feel about
that's
excess
going
and
to take us
deficiency.
to 307,000,
Of actual available cash, yes.
right?
Yep. Yep.
And our auditors recommend that we have 1.2 million.
Correct.
So we are in a very uncomfortable situation with free cash or excess and
Absolutely.
deficiency. It would be totally irresponsible to take another penny.
Absolutely. And I think that whether it's a neighboring region or other regions, there are some regions that have, there are several. I mean, I was actually shocked to see the number of regions that actually have their excess and deficiency capped out at 5%. They're there. That they're actually, they have to use a portion of their E&D each year to reduce the assessment. I would dream to be there at $2 million plus. Also, there's several regions, including our neighbors, that have a stabilization fund, and we've never figured out a way. The only way you fund a stabilization account is if you have money at the end of a year, or you build it as a funded line in an operating budget. So, yeah, to say that we are down to the bare minimum is not exaggerating. And then we have said we've had school choice revolving balances in the past. Our gate receipts we've used all towards the stadium project. Thankfully, we had the building use to snow below the roofs last year when we had a crazy winter. So the reality is we don't have reserves, and that's a very uncomfortable place to be. I can say, as the guy who ultimately has to say, here are the numbers and we're in good standing, it's not a comfortable place to be. So looking through the revenues again, if we had even, so we're using 100,000 of our excess and deficiency. You see that as actually a reduction in a revenue because we used 250 last year. Chapter 70, again, that's $20 per pupil, and actually the $20 per pupil isn't $62,815. The reality is, you remember, our Chapter 70 adjusted slightly last year at the very end of the year. We didn't change the budget, so we're going to get a little bit more Chapter 70. It's like $12,000 than we budgeted for this year. So that's the total change. Again, as you said, and we're talking about 0.7%. Even if we got 2.5, even if just like living within the levy, even if we got 2.5, that'd be $210,000. Doesn't solve all the problems, but it certainly starts to put a dent. Transportation aid, that is level funded, but again, our costs increase, so we get a higher percentage reimbursement, and also the state does not include homeless transport reimbursement. I believe the number Jay Sullivan gave was 43%, 43%, 45% that we'd be reimbursed with the number that's in the governor's budget for homeless transport. Jay Sullivan is the, I don't know what his title is anymore. I think he's the director of finance for the Department of Ed. So he is the guy as far as anything financial. And then if you want to talk Chapter 70 formula and have something nice to read as you fall asleep, it's Roger Hatch. And the retirees, again, we budget the full cost of any retiree plans. The retirees pay in their portion, so you can see the changes there. So with 1.478 increase in expenditures and actually a loss of 37,000 in revenues, that's where we start to paint the picture of how we arrive at the tentative budget. So if we turn to page 12, I won't go through these in detail, but this is basically the same things we've talked about. Elementary math specialists, and I have to say, we've made assumptions. We've tried to not identify, obviously, some of these positions. Folks are obviously very easily identified, and we certainly had conversations with those folks. But as far as the calculation of how we arrived at these savings, there may be folks who have said quietly they're retiring. There may have been folks who said quietly, I'm actually leaving to pursue something else. So there's not a lot of detail, nor will we have a lot of detail, but just so that you're aware, these numbers could be fluid, but at this point, this is what it would look like. So the elementary math specialists, again, reducing from 3 to 2. I'm sorry, 3 to 1. Last week we talked about making that 3 to 2. And again, we were trying to find a way to find other ways of saving the money, because I think as we get to the tentative budget, we're still at a number that may not be palatable. But that number, we couldn't find savings in other places. So what we actually did, if you see on the next line, is we're proposing adding $20,000 to professional develop in service. That could potentially be used for math and focus, because again, I should take it back. One of the key roles that the math specialists have played this past year is the support and implementation of the math and focus curriculum K through 8. Obviously, they are key to that process. 1 year in, there is obviously a lot more expertise across the entire district with teachers K through 8. That doesn't mean they don't need the support. That doesn't mean they don't want the support. So our concept is there would still be one district person to help coordinate and work with the data and a lot of that information. But also, rather than losing the savings of a whole person, if we put $20,000 into in-service, that could be used, whether that be directly paid to math and focus for actual math and focus trainers to come on site, or if we do have expertise, if we pay individuals a stipend to provide professional development, to provide support outside of the regular school day. So is that an ideal scenario? 150% no. Again, I don't think anything on this page is anything that we can say we're comfortably proposing as a viable option. It's the least worse, I believe was the phrase that was quoted. Continuing on.
Brian, maybe we should explain how this emerges. This came out of a discussion on Monday morning within the district management team, where we looked at this. The chief academic officer, who can't be here tonight because she has to attend a wake, suggested that this was a solution that she could help make work. Just so you know where it comes from. It's not sort of snatched out of the air, but quite a lengthy discussion within that group.
And I would say that all of these 5 items here that are reductions are born out of, it's got to be 6 different discussions now with the entire leadership team, including the principals, knowing full well that we don't have places to cut without affecting programming. But again, it's finding the least impact. As principals, especially at the elementary level, the priority was class size and the reading specialists and interventionists. Those were the focus, where they were saying, obviously, class size is key. The reading and specialists and reading interventionists were obviously very key. And again, that is not to say that the math specialists aren't important. But again, if we're establishing priorities, it's unfortunate that we have to make the difficult decisions. As Christopher mentioned, the combination of the elementary library and technology integration specialist roles into one role, that would reduce 3 staff. That would save $145,000. Elementary classroom teachers, we've identified potentially 2 at Newbury and 2 at Pine Grove. Again, that number could change as we go through the process, and enrollments can and often do fluctuate. We wouldn't speak about specific grade levels. We would rely on the principals, as they know the buildings, they know the staff, they know the students, to work with the teachers to identify where those reductions would be. That would save 212, almost 213. In middle school foreign language, as we've talked about tonight, reducing 2 of 4 teachers. Again, the original discussion was to make it an elective, or whether that be an elective, or if it's something where we, as Mrs. Faulkner suggested, it be that it's a core subject at 8th grade but not 7th grade. Again, not something we would suggest. So all in, those savings of $631,000, that's a first-year savings, because included in that number is 36% for unemployment costs. So the following year, the savings would be about 36% higher. That assumes, again, any folks that we've identified as would be the potential folks who would go. It assumes the offset for unemployment, and it assumes any savings in their benefits. So
can I just interject? At your last meeting, you wanted to have an indication as to what the schedule would look like around world languages. I met with the chief academic officer and the two principals today to look at a draft schedule that the middle schoolers prepared. I have to tell you, constructing a schedule is a very, very complicated task because the middle school administration have had the dual challenge of changing the schedule to create world languages as an elective while simultaneously aligning it with the high school schedule. This morning's meeting suggested that we may have a schedule that will do the job. There are some things we still have to discuss because it reduces the number of lunches from 5 to 4. It means that middle school would have lunch at 11:30 instead of 10:30. The complication is it would start with a high school lunch, have 2 middle school lunches, and then a high school lunch. And middle schoolers have a different diet according to the federal government than high schoolers, so that the kitchen has got to kind of modify what it has out in order to do the serving. And I haven't had a chance to talk with our catering services manager about that. What we have needs testing. The principal of the high school met with program coordinators today to create an opportunity to start having faculty input into it. The middle school principal was looking to establish a meeting early tomorrow to enable staff to start commenting on and making suggestions, looking for things why it won't work. So we think we've made a lot of progress, but we're not in a position to say, look, it's stitched up. And clearly it's not stitched up, partly because what we have at the moment treats world languages as simply part of a rotation. And one thing that Mrs. Faulkner and I will agree on is that experience of world languages should be a continuous experience and not a periodic one. She's nodding good. So we don't know whether we can make that work. We talked last time about backing world languages up with PE so that both would be a continuous experience through the year. We're not there yet, but we have made a lot of progress. So I hope that's a satisfactory report as far as that request was concerned.
Continuing so to the middle of the page where it says net changes in expenditures. So you can see the total from the other side, the 1,478,257. We net off the reductions above of 631,000, and we arrive at a net expenditure change of 846,678. That is then a net increase of 2.24% on our operating expenditure, which you'll see on the next page. At the bottom there, you can then see that 846 along with 37,000 less in revenue means that we assess to the towns $883,697. So if you turn the page to page 13, you then see that in the format which I believe everyone's accustomed to. Starting at the top, you can see our FY tentative operating expenditures increased by $846,678, 2.24%. Our capital debt services decreased by $94,500, or 3.36%. So the net operating and capital is an increase of $752,178. You then see all the things we talked about in detail right through the revenue portion. And then you get to the assessment box. And if we turn the page to page 16, again, we get to the enrollment worksheet that's showing you where we are as far as our foundation enrollment. It's important to mention that the drop was a little bit more precipitous this year, and that has to do with an error that the way accounting methodology. No students were counted inaccurately, but it was a counting methodology where we were counting a full head for a preschooler up until 14 and a full head for kindergarten through 15. So those have been corrected. So that didn't necessarily give an advantage to one town or another, but it just meant the kindergarten students and preschool students were counted commensurately higher, and now they're getting commensurately lower. So you can see that Newbury saw a reduction of 73 students, Rowley a reduction of 42 students, in Salisbury a reduction of 28 students. If we said that that impact of that counting methodology affected by about 25 students, you can see that, you know, Salisbury barely decreased as far as actual students walking into the building. Rowley a small decrease, in Newbury still a decrease of 30-some-odd students. So the trend continues of Salisbury staying relatively stable or decreasing by single digits, Rowley generally in the teens, and Newbury last year in the 40s, this year in the 30s, as far as actual people or actual students. But again, the net foundation enrollment loss is 143 students. So that on page 16 translates to the changes in the assessments. And if you look, I'm sorry, the change in the percentage assessments. And you can see the boxes there. Newbury went from 31.21% in fiscal 16 up to down to 30.07%. So they lost 1.14% of the budget share. Rowley went from 32.62 up to 32.81. And Salisbury went from 36 up to 37.12. If you go back to page 14, the Chapter 70 formula, again this year, the way the governor proposed it, I believe it was 3 years ago now, the early budget included 100% effort reduction, which again, think of that as the state's way of providing more money to cities and towns that are paying more than their formula says their fair share says they should. So for Newbury still is above target. So the more effort reduction is funded in the formula, the lower the town's minimum local contribution is going to go. So 2 years ago it was 25% is where they landed. Last year it was funded at 40%. The governor's budget this year funds it at 70%. So you can see the minimum local contributions there. We've got Newbury's is at $6,483,342. That is a decrease of $640,000. Rowley went from 6,809 to 6,808, a decrease of $1,500. And Salisbury went from 7.987 to 7,805,000, a decrease of $182,000. So all this discussion that we've had thus far has presented a budget that, on face value, as far as actually us controlling costs, represents a budget that was, what was the number, 3.9% increase. With the reductions, we land at a net 2.24% increase. But again, because the state's not contributing any more to Chapter 70, any meaningful amount more, and then we, in the regional agreement, still have this two-step formula, we find assessments that are, again, way out of whack. So if we go back to page 13, just so that you have the context for how these are generated, as long as we're using the two-step method, we have no control over the way that those minimum local contributions change. So because of the huge swing, Newbury's assessment, again, that same $883,697, so it's a 3.18% increase in the assessment to towns. Newbury's assessment drops to $8,752,000, a decrease of $193,000. Rowley's increase goes from 8.7 to almost 9.3 for a total of $569,000 in new spending. And Salisbury goes from almost 10.1 to a shade over 10.6 for an increase of $507,000. So those figures are obviously very different than what they would be if we were to even go back to the shares and talk about 30%, 32%, 37%. But the reality is, even if we've talked about the concept of a 5-year rolling average. With a 5-year rolling average, if we implemented it with the formula that we have in the regional agreement now and just said we'll do a 5-year rolling average for the enrollment piece, that still doesn't address the minimum local contribution at the state level. We can't change that formula. So as long as we're bound by that formula, we then are subject to this happening. I mean, I want to say it out loud that I can't, Newbury can't continue to decrease at this rate for forever. I mean, the reality is that's going to level out as we graduate those larger classes off, and in those same kind of 50 to 60 students per grade level levels out, then those amounts level off. But the reality is the hand we're forced produces assessments this year that are way out of whack. And just to paint a picture for you,
Excuse me.
bless you, if we used a figure of Rowley at 222,000, we're cutting another $1,060,000. And if we cut that money, Newbury would go back $512,000 less than they're spending this year. Newbury would go up, or Rowley would go up roughly 222, and Salisbury would go up 113,000. And we'd be cutting $1,060,000 beyond what we've presented so far tonight. I don't know if there are any questions about that.
I have a question, Brian. Why are the enrollment figures different?
Microphone.
Why are the enrollment figures different? Because on page 3, the enrollment is 2,511. And then on page 16, I think it was 2,484, which includes choice.
Does not include choice. So, I'm sorry, that
Because
includes...
you said, it says it includes choice.
So the figures that Christopher was using, referenced earlier in the narrative, is actual physical students sitting in our classrooms K through 6. It doesn't include preschool, and it doesn't include, that includes students being choiced in. For foundation, any students who are here, choiced in, get counted on the foundation counts of their sending district. Likewise, the 80 students that we have choiced out, those students count on Newbury, Raleigh, or Salisbury, regardless of where they're attending. And charter as well, I should say. I don't know if there's questions to that point. I mean, as far as the remainder of the document, it's pretty straightforward. If I can take it quickly to page 17, I know we've been talking about this for a long time. Page 17 does not assume any changes in class sizes or reductions. Page 17 shows you what we have this year and what we would have next year without cuts. There's a note there that states that simply because we haven't identified where the cuts would be. We've talked about scenarios, whether it's 2nd grade, 4th grade, 6th grade, but the reality is that's a decision that we would have to make with the principals wherever we land with those final numbers. So that's an important note. On the next page, on page 18, there's a red note at the top. You can see on that top summary by school site, summary by DSE function at the bottom is a much more accurate representation of the actual increase in costs. The top includes the movement of close, it's actually close to $1.1 or $1.2 million worth of electricity funding, natural gas and oil funding, and water funding to a district line. So I will just quickly point that out in the schools as well, but when you look at those school-based summaries, it looks a little odd that we've got Newbury decreasing by 84, Salisbury by 76, middle school by 9, and the high school by 210, with the district increasing over $1 million. The reality is Pine Grove School, you see they didn't decrease. The reality is their electricity and water costs are significantly less than the other campuses. So that's why they didn't decrease as commensurately. And just to point that out on the bottom of each page, on on page 21 for Newbury Elementary. You can see that at the bottom of each school now. You'll look at that where it says maintenance subtotal, right below it, heating, fuel, water, electricity. You can see that those have been zeroed out, and it shows a significant decrease. There's some notes there at the bottom of each section. And then at the bottom of page 33, you see that there's, nope, I'm sorry, the middle of page 32, you see that increase of $1.1 million for operations and maintenance. I don't believe there's anything else. The remainder of the document is the same. You've got an outline of revolving accounts with projections of where we'd land this year with balances, and you've got a summary of the current grants we have. Again, we don't know next year's grants, so we provide you with all of this year's grants, and we make the assumption, unless we have a better intelligence, that we would receive those same grants. So are there any other questions?
Well, I would just like to ask a few questions about the combination of the librarian and the IT specialist. And my question is, obviously, STEM is important. You talked about that. We also, all those other programs are important too, for music and the arts, for all the reasons, Christopher, you said. Just remind me again what those changes look like when we move two positions into one. Those kids won't be going directly to the library or to the Technology Media Center as a special, right?
So they would. So the concept is and again, I would, what is the phrase used? This hasn't been perfectly stitched up, but the concept would be that there would be one person who fills that role, who would have both the library media and technology expertise, and would utilize both the library and the computer lab. So teachers have planning periods, and when they do, the students go to art, music, PE, library, and technology right now. The theory would be they would continue to go to art, music, and PE. So those classes would remain. And then the fourth would be a combination. So when we discuss it, we thought, okay, maybe one week they go to library, the next week they're using the lab, the next week in the library. Maybe it's by quarter. The fifth period still has to be maintained. And so what that would be is there would be a rotating schedule. So if I'm a third grade student,
That's right.
I might have art, music, PE, tech, and have another art that week. And then the following week, I'd have an art, music, PE, and I'm going to go to the library this time, but I might also have another music class. So there would still be 5 specials, so that the library and technology would be combined as an experience for students. And as it was mentioned last week, that there's definitely a negative impact. It's less time in the library, it's less time in the computer lab, unequivocally a negative impact. But then it would be backfilled with an additional section of potentially that library technology or one of the other 3 specials on a rotating basis.
But that weekly visit doesn't go away. And then my other kind of question, just to maybe feel a little bit better about it, if possible, is that regarding the technology piece, we have smart boards in a lot of our classrooms. Is it reasonable to assume that kids are getting more technology as part of their everyday classroom than they did several years ago when going to that technology lab was where most of it happened, as opposed to it being integrated in their day?
Yes, I would say
And
that's a
with
fair
Math in
statement,
Focus,
absolutely.
there's a lot of technology components to
There is.
it
And the Chrome carts.
Yeah.
in the Chrome cards.
You know, again, you saw in the inventory, we have more Chromebooks than we do PCs. So we still don't have nearly enough. So there is certainly more technology. There is certainly more technology in the classrooms. The reality is, and I would maintain this forever, in an ideal world, both the librarian and the technology integration specialist are full-time, but they're not covering a special. So it's not where teachers are dropping off students. It's an opportunity where the librarian is a resource for the whole school. they're working in classrooms coming in to work with the librarian. And the same with the instructional technology specialist. It's about a resource that helps teachers. There are varying comfort levels with implementing and the utilization of technology in the classroom. So helping teachers work with technology, sometimes in the lab, sometimes going out to the classrooms. But again, that would be adding significant funding because you're then having two people that would not provide specials coverage. But to answer the direct question, yes, there is more technology in the classrooms. That doesn't mean, that might then make the argument that there's more need for support there then.
I also got some feedback from elementary teachers that with regard to library, that a lot of the elementary classrooms almost have mini libraries in them. They've built up that resource in the classroom. Not to say that main library isn't important, but over the years, there seems to be more of an integration of technology and library within individual classrooms, so maybe less of a dependency on those other sites.
I mean, I would say that there's certainly, at the elementary level, we have leveled book rooms, and so there's leveled texts that have a very different purpose than what would be a library as far as research and gaining information and accessing information. I think that might go to the discussion that Christopher said earlier. When you have these difficult discussions, we start to say, well, we could do away with. Is it less of a priority? There are certainly more books in classrooms. Absolutely, teachers have classroom libraries. I don't believe it replaces a library. No.
Could I just build on that a little bit? We need to have a clear view about what a librarian, library media specialist job is these days. It is not to organize and hand out books. Their role has been described by Eisenberg as a big six. How do you find information? How do you collect it? How do you store it? How do you analyze it? How do you begin to develop conclusions from the data that you've got? How do you build hypotheses? How do you test the hypotheses? So that is really arguably the focus of a librarian's work. But arguably, it's also the role of every teacher to do that. So I think there's a merging of the role of good teaching and the role of the library media specialist. The other thing I just want to add is, isn't it tragic that our discussion about what we call specialist classes is based upon how many planning periods do we need to cover for the core teachers to have their contractual planning period every day? That while I've been here, has been the driving force behind curriculum discussion in the elementary school in terms of breadth. And that is a terrible situation to be in. And I profoundly regret that in 5 years, I haven't moved that needle one bit in terms of really looking at the elementary curriculum as a whole and what should be the balance be between its different elements.
Was this about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just from my personal experience, they definitely do have leveled book libraries in the classrooms. But interestingly enough, when you have the kindergartners come into the library, one of the most popular things they take out is the Magic Treehouse series. To the point that I don't shelve them anymore. They stay out on tables in the picture book section because that's what they're looking for and that's what they go for. So they are going, typically those kids are looking for things far above what they would get in their classroom. It's not available to them there, and those tend to be the books that I see inspiring them.
Dina?
Thank you, Deb. I have a couple of questions. First off, in January, when we were talking about what advice we wanted, or what things we wanted you to put into the budget, we all felt that the social workers were an important piece. I don't see that reflected. Am I missing something?
So again, we had talked about the fact that Salisbury has an additional social worker, so the priority was at Newbury and Pine Grove. the discussion with the principals was, there's certainly a general population, but it's a very specific population of students that is generating that dire need. So that $266,000 that we have in the out-of-district tuition line, the theory is and the hope is that we are able to retain those 4 or 5 students, build a program at Pine Grove School that would include a full-time social worker, that would address some of the heavy hitters, if you will, but also have the capacity to have that social worker work at Newbury Elementary half-time as well. So it'd be half-time in the program, half-time at Newbury. And again, it's not ideal. A full-time would absolutely be justified, but it at least addresses that need, and it addresses it for that most high-need population.
In practical terms, the social worker may not be there when the child is
Needing them.
However, we will be able to program work with the family.
Okay.
And in discussion with the principals, obviously all of this has come up and been rehashed. And certainly, again, the discussion was, no, if it comes down to even this many teachers, let alone more teachers, then they would keep classroom positions before they go.
Okay. We also discussed reviewing the number of IAs we have in relation to IEPs. Has that been able to be done, or do we have some idea as to if there will be any reductions?
We had a discussion yesterday about my intention to keel haul any principals who retained IAs that weren't justified. I don't know if you know what keel hauling is. It would take place in the Parker River. Are you all familiar with keel hauling? It's a habit.
You're about to be.
in the British Navy when sailors don't do what they're supposed to do. They're tied onto a rope. The rope passes onto the boat. The boat has lots of barnacles, and they pull the young man underneath the boat.
Well,
As a Title IX director for the district, I just want to say he hasn't actually done this.
As a result of this, one principal gave up 2 IAs.
good to
So
know.
if I could just point that out, on page 10, Dina, we had talked about the need to add 2 IAs at the high school.
Uh-huh.
That's now a 0. That was a $65,000 increase. That's now a 0 because of that very, not necessarily that particular threat, but there were 2 IAs that were identified. I mean, we continue to have the discussion. Could there be more? Yes.
We will go through every one before we get to the final budget to have a justification for every one of them.
Great, thank you. And can I just add one last question? I have some concerns now about the alignment of the middle school and the high school schedule, because there seems to be, I thought we had it more planned out than what it seems to be, and my concern is we have a lot of things in this budget that are contingent upon that aligning up. What happens if it doesn't?
The middle school principal has a plan B to retain a middle school schedule.
And how would that affect our budget then?
We wouldn't
Should have
technically need
a neutral effect.
We wouldn't technically need
Probably not.
to make the full-time art and PE. So that would save $25,000.
Okay, thank you.
Monique?
I wasn't here last week, so maybe you discussed this, but my question has to do with world language at the middle school. Let me see if I understand this. There are 2 language teachers in the 7th grade and 2 in the 8th grade, and those are core subjects and part of the rotation for
Part
the
of the team.
kids. So there are 5 subjects that the
5 core
kids have.
subjects, yeah.
So the proposal is to change it to 2 and make it an elective. And Mrs. Faulkner said for the 8th grade only as a proposal, or the elective is for both grades with
No,
2 teachers?
the schedule which has been developed assumes that both 7th and 8th grade would have an opportunity to study a world language. During the course of the day, some middle school teachers had a conversation with the principal, making the suggestion that Mrs. Faulkner made earlier in the meeting. The principal hasn't had an opportunity to see how that would work, and we take the suggestion seriously, but we need to do some work on it.
There was quite a bit of discussion
Yeah, there
about
must have
that.
been, okay, I don't want to
But the key is the elective would be 7 and 8. the key is the proposal originally was electives are both 7th and 8th. The new discussion was making it a
Right,
core
core.
requirement at grade 8.
Now, why was this particular, why was world language selected for middle school?
I mean,
Well, one thing that
Because
we-
it's so important at the middle school level. I
One-
don't understand it.
One thing that we talked about last week, and we did talk about this extensively, was that there are very high-performing schools, Andover and Wellesley, I think that you said, that do not have it as a core requirement. And the other point that was made to at least partially support this was that not all students their time is not all students spend their time best learning a foreign language. There are some students who would be better served doing something else, and they're not able to do that because they have to take a foreign language as a core subject.
But there's something else. What we talked about was improving their reading and writing skills and math skills because
In
they
English.
are in need in English because they are struggling in that area and they're not allowed to be pulled out of core subjects for that kind of support. Is that
But if I can just,
accurate or
yes,
not?
but if I can speak to how we arrived there, it was literally brainstorming with the principals. What can we cut? I mean, we reduced 5 teachers at the high school last year, an interventionist at the high school, 2 at Newbury, 3 at Newbury, 2 at Pine Grove, 1 at Salisbury. And so we had this discussion as of starting in December with the principals and finding ourselves in the exact same position, and it became this list of some of the most extreme cuts. I mean, we've literally discussed every possible option, and even asked last week, are there other things that you want to suggest that we haven't thought of? Because the reality is none of this is good. None of this is good. But again, getting to the least worse impact, even the concept of late buses, we threw that back out. That's $70,000. That last year, that was a huge impact. And now the benefit is the buses are full. A lot of times they were running empty, but now they're running, and it has, as Christopher mentioned, middle school sports wouldn't exist without the late buses right now. So it's not because we said, hey, let's target foreign language at the middle school. It was where do we find ways of saving money?
I mean, one of the discussions was if you look at the projected class sizes in the middle school next year, it's about 20 in grade 7 and 21 in grade 8. And so you could have a conversation about, well, those are pretty good, but then if you start playing with the core classes, you finish up taking the team system apart in the middle school. So how do you have a debate around, is it better to put the world languages as an elective rather than mix up, not just mix up, but take apart the team structure? The alternatives are very problematic.
When you make it an elective, will every child have an opportunity to have that elective?
Well, I suggested last year it will be guided choice. I mean, there are some students who really have got other priorities in terms of their developmental needs at that time. Hang on, yeah.
Okay, what we need...
What Mrs. Faulkner is suggesting is that not all students take a world language, that we do have interventions and we pull them out. That's not your policy, but it makes sense.
What should happen, according to rules of order, is we should move this tentative budget, have any final discussion on it, and then take a vote. That's what we should be doing. So is it your recommendation?
On the basis that this is the high water mark,
yes.
As the narrative says, from here on, it can only go down, and historically it has gone down. I think this is the starting point for our next piece of work.
So I'm asking you if your recommendation for the operating assessment is the $28,643,574.
Reluctantly, yes.
Could we have a motion to approve a tentative operating budget for years 2016, 2017 in the amount of $28,643,574 to divide up between the 3 towns? Newbury, $8,752,942. Rowley, $9,284,296. Salisbury, $10,606,336. Again, a total of $28,643,574. Could we have a motion?
So moved.
Could we have a second, please? Is there any further discussion? Dick?
Yes, I have a problem with the, we're all taking cuts here, but it seems like all the elementary schools are bearing the brunt of this. And as you know, with the class size study that's on the Raleigh town website, it's most important that the grades K through 4, the children in those grades have reduced class sizes not to exceed 18 or 19. And here we're taking 11 teaching positions or staff positions out of all of the elementary schools, and yet our budget, Newberry is paying less, but they're also going to get less. Raleigh is paying more, but they're going to get less. And Salisbury is paying more, and they're going to get less.
Dick, can I ask you? Are you suggesting changing that figure, or what do you?
I'd like to see if we could, if there is a way to change that figure upward, not downward, or not have the elementary schools bear the brunt of the cuts in staffing.
I'm not quite sure what to say, because that seems to have been a discussion we should have had earlier.
Well, I wanted to do it, but I didn't know we were going.
No, I don't mean before tonight. I don't mean earlier tonight. I mean.
Can I just somewhat respond to that? I understand what you're saying, Dick, and I share your frustration, but remember that last year we made deep cuts to the high school level. And as the superintendent and the assistant superintendent have pointed out, if we make any more cuts to the middle school, we are going to be totally dismantling what their programming is right now and what their formatting is right now. All of this is distasteful to me, and I hope that anybody who's listening to this goes to this budget and looks at pages 5 through 9, which is what we proposed as an adequate budget. And in my view, that's not even adequate there. But just so you know that, I understand your frustration, but we had nowhere else to cut. And I commend the administration for looking at everything, even though they were not able to incorporate what we asked them to. They know their job. They know the running of the school much better than any of us do, and it's unfortunate. It really is. But I understand your frustration.
Could I just advise that certainly in discussions with the principals, we see keeping the early years class sizes down as a priority?
Narissa?
Can I just ask, looking for a clarification, on the, if I'm remembering correctly, I didn't see it in here, but on the 2 pre-K editions, one at NES and one at Salisbury, I believe, are those both on interventions? Was it an intervention that drove the increase there?
Yes. So based on students coming out of EI, early intervention, that would be the 5-day program at Newbury would be primarily populated. And again, it's always a mix. There's always interest in a 5-day program. So there's certainly a need to provide those services in an affordable way, students coming out of EI. But also my assumption is we would fill that class up pretty easily, because there's always folks looking for a half-day, 5-day session.
All right, thank you.
But the same at Salisbury, yes.
Anything else that we need to touch on?
Well, I was last week I had asked about the possibility of discussions about the, $700 and some thousand that is pay raises that are 2% pay raise, and we talked about the possibility of a PD day. I mean, that's the big nut to crack here. I mean, we love our teachers. They work hard. We want to give that to them, but that means we will lose teachers. And I'm not suggesting a pay cut. I'm suggesting conversations about less of a pay raise rather than the full 2%, maybe 1%, and see what those numbers look like. And I know we're not going to have those without negotiations and an agreement, but I just don't know how we can keep ignoring that. I mean, that is the big, and we're at 0 right now for healthcare, so that is not a cut in any way out of anybody's pocket. Am I the only one that is interested in having that conversation?
There has been a very informal conversation with the TRTA. Our impression is that, unsurprisingly, they're not enthusiastic. But I think if the committee wants to go down that line, the P&N committee should meet with the TRTA to have the discussion. I don't feel I have authority to go and negotiate that unless you instruct me to.
I just want to say, though, that voting this number doesn't preclude that conversation at all. That would be a separate.
It would, but rather than, if we're talking that this is a high water mark, then maybe the high water mark could be another couple $100,000 higher with that kind of a change, as opposed to it reducing what we're looking at now.
But it wouldn't change. The assessment would stay the same, and if we saved $300,000, we would restore $300,000. So the high water mark is the operating budget total.
That's what I'm saying, that would not affect this number. It would make...
it would restore things.
Yes, yes, but it does not. What we're voting on tonight is this number right here. Any savings that come from negotiations or any other source would reduce the cuts that have to be made. But this is the number that we need to vote tonight.
Can we just be clear? Reductions can have two effects. One is to reduce the cuts, the other is to reduce the actual budget increase and the assessments of the towns. The two are very much intertwined.
And that recommendation is heard by the PNN subcommittee.
Thank you.
Is there anything else?
Can I just make one friendly amendment? As far as for the record, you mentioned an operating budget of $28,643,000. The actual operating budget is $38,670,989.
That's why I asked you, because where are we? Give me a number to read. What page?
So the recommendation is back on page 13.
Thank you.
So
I am on page 13.
So it's right at the top, a total operating budget of $38,670,989.
Let me reword my motion. Could we have a motion to approve a fiscal year 17 tentative budget of $38,670,989?
And then the rest of that piece about all the assessments that you already said.
And the rest of that piece I already said. Could we have that motion?
So moved.
Could we have a second?
I'll second it.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Reluctantly.
Yes. Thank you.
You need to do the capital
The
budget.
capital improvement, yes, capital.
Deb, can I just comment
Certainly.
now that we're done with that part? Piggybacking on what Robin said, if we are going to be looking at that, any discussion of cuts for teachers, I think that goes across the board for administrators and non-union personnel too. I just want that said.
Yes, that's a good
Right,
thing to say in
but-
public, because we actually did say that in a PNN meeting already.
Yes, we have, but it needs to be said in public as well.
We have another motion. I'd need a motion to approve an FY17 tentative capital debt service budget of $2,719,750.
So moved.
Could we have a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Next.
We have to withdraw the school calendar from this meeting. We need to have further discussions with the Teachers Association before we can bring a recommendation to you. That doesn't mean to say there's any hostility in that or anything. We just need to have some further discussions.
So we will take that up at a later meeting. Next on the agenda is to note with satisfaction correspondence from the MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority, confirming that the proposal for the refurbishment and updating of the Pine Grove Elementary School will be part of feasibility phase of the project.
Yes.
Yes.
And we are meeting, we have a kickoff call tomorrow morning with our project manager, and Joe Perry will be joining us as a selectman from Rowley.
And a report from Mr. Farmer.
My report will be brief. You have my non-routine schedule there. I forgot to add that I did watch the boys skate against Newburyport and the girls defeat Ipswich at basketball. I do want to mention our safety arrangements, because there has been some comment in the press recently around concerns about school safety. My judgment is that the arrangements we have in place are exemplary and aligned with the expectations of our emergency services. Brian, I don't know if you'd just like to talk about the kind of collaboration that we have with them.
Absolutely. Susan Fallon, who is no longer working at Triton, it's been 5-6 years since she was no longer working here. I have to say is responsible for implementing safety plans that are all aligned with the Incident Command System, ICS. We've had those since 2005. We've had extensive plans. We have safety committees that meet with the building principal. Chris Walsh is involved in every single one of those. They meet on a monthly basis. We today had a drill with MEMA. I believe Patty did a phenomenal job and we passed. But all of the schools have lockdown drills, have stay-in-place drills. Is there more we could do? Obviously, there's always more you could do with more resources and more time. But we have, with the school bomb threats going around being almost like wildfire now, we have a protocol. Everyone's aware of the protocol. We have it by the phones. We follow the state bomb squad and fire marshal trainings that we've been part of. So I would say, as Christopher mentioned, we have had for many years, and I see other districts saying they're starting to implement these safety plans. We have had these plans in place for many years, and I think beyond the plans, we have an incredible working relationship with the public safety officials in each town. Obviously, this campus resides in Newbury, so we have the most involvement with them, but with Salisbury and with Rowley as well. They've been active participants in our safety committees, meeting on a monthly basis. Whenever there are issues, they help address them. They're incredibly professional, incredibly resourceful, and incredibly responsive, and we're unbelievably grateful for the amount of support that they've provided. So I would say, yes, we are in a very solid place as far as our response.
But that doesn't mean to say that we can prevent everything. If somebody wants to do harm and they have the appropriate toolkit, that they can do it. All we can do is do our best to respond in a thoughtful way when it happens. Incidentally, I was in touch with you over the misreporting of a bomb in Salisbury. It took about 36 hours, but in the end, the state police did apologize for the fact that they never made contact with the district, that they were telling the press that there was a bomb scare in Salisbury, and they never contacted us. So, there's imperfections everywhere. I don't have anything else to report today. But if you have questions about the district in general, and it looks as if Mr. Sullivan does.
Yes.
I do. Looking at the superintendent's report, I noticed there were no minutes from Pine Grove, which is fine, so I went to the website to see if I could look them up myself, only to find that there's nothing there for school council. At least the other schools, NES lists the school council members, but the agendas and the minutes are not posted. And the middle school lists the school council members. I think Salisbury does a fabulous job. They have their school council members listed there. Their agenda and their minutes are right there as well. Noting the importance of school councils, I think that we need to make sure that that information is easily available to the public.
We will take that under advisement.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Farmer on his report? Moving along to the subcommittee reports. Policy Subcommittee met on January 26th. We have a recommendation that the school committee adopt the revised policy on the physical restraint of students as a first reading as recommended by the Policy Subcommittee at its meeting on January 26, 2016. Could we have that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on that?
There is one amendment.
There
If
is
you look
one
at
amendment.
one purpose, at the end of 1B, there's an or, which doesn't make any sense, and it should say and. Just to give you the background of I prepared the original. I was advised that I needed to add a provision that parents could agree that where a student is regularly restrained, that they could waive some of the reporting arrangements. That has been deleted by the reference at the top of page 2, where it talks about special circumstances, and by the redaction of the middle of page 7. And with those changes, this will be acceptable to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
May I
Dana?
ask a question? On page 57, I'm just wondering, where it says the general training of district personnel, will there be some sort of documentation to note that these people have been trained? Not only the designated ones, but new members?
That will be required.
Thank you.
And I have to tell you, we have a lot to do in order to put all this in place. And of course, there is no funding for any
You
of
knew
this.
that, yes. Any further discussion?
I want to ask for clarification.
Sure.
This elimination of the parent waiver, that's a DESE regulation?
Yes.
Okay.
So it means that everything has to be recorded.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Could I just say that physical restraint of students is very rare in the district? I mean, clearly there are special education programs where it may be because of the disability of the child, be more frequent, but it happens very infrequently here.
Remember, this is a first reading. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Next, the recommendation that the school committee adopt the policy on the administration of Narcan as a first reading is recommended by the policy subcommittee at its meeting on January 26, 2016. Could we have that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Dick, seconded by Dick. Any discussion on this policy as a first reading? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. The Personnel and Negotiations Subcommittee should be a capital B. And there was a meeting on January 15th, 2016, 28th, 2016, and February 4th, 2016. Dina, is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, just as I said, we're meeting with the PEC again tomorrow to continue talking about healthcare savings, and after we get through some of this, then we'll again start working on our goal.
Okay, thank you. That is the end of tonight's listed agenda. I do want to remind everybody who is seeing this and who may look at it at a later time that on Wednesday night, 2 weeks from tonight, will be the public hearing on the tentative budget. I urge anyone who is a stakeholder in this school district to please come to that meeting. That is your opportunity to give your input as to the tentative budget that we voted tonight. So when I say that, I mean residents, people that work in the district, students, anybody. Please come and talk to us, because that's what we have. We need your input. So if you have any comments, positive, negative, please come and talk that evening. There is a format. You will have a time limit, and we will ask that you don't duplicate what other people say. But again, I hope we have this place packed with people who would like to help us with input. So that's 2 weeks from tonight. 4 weeks from tonight will be March 9th. It's our next regular school committee meeting when we will vote the budget. Linda?
We also have to make sure that people know that the public hearing is for the policy that we had for student service.
Yeah, we've got that on the draft agenda.
Just want to
Yeah.
make sure that,
You want to say that again?
that the,
Louder, Linda.
that the public hearing is also going to be for parents to speak about the survey, the student surveys.
Yes, thank you very much. Anything else? Could we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you very much. Encourage all your friends and neighbors to come.